back, everyone. This is the Coverager Podcast. It's a late Friday afternoon. I'm pleased to do some geeking out on the engineering side of this. My guest this week is Laurie Conner. Laurie is the president and CEO of the Detection Group. And so we're going to get into some engineering stuff. It's not private eyes or anything like that. It's a good old-fashioned engineering along with modern technology and how we can apply that to risk and insurance. Laurie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nick. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. This is going to be a fun conversation because it's actually a topic that's very close to my heart, which is modern technology. And for those that are listening now, they've probably already have listened to a conversation I had with telematics regarding automobiles. This is a little bit different. This is using smart technology in a commercial setting. I always start off, Laurie, with giving the floor to my guest for an elevator pitch. The Detection Group. Can you describe it in your own words?
Sure. The Detection Group was founded to help commercial properties avoid water damage. So we do that very simply using cloud-based IoT technology. And I know that your listeners, I'm sure, have heard about both of those, both the cloud and how important it is, particularly now in the times where people are working remotely. And in fact, we're using the cloud right now to have this interview. And IoT stands for the Internet of Things, as you know, and it really uses the new technology for wireless sensors that we're placing in buildings. And so it's a pretty simple system. Think about this like a smoke detector for water damage.
That's a really good way of putting it, because that's what it is, right? So these sensors have become very sophisticated over time in what they can do and how they do it. Can you talk a little bit about the breadth of different types of technology used to detect water?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. And you're right. I mean, 30 years ago now, probably the technology was what we call screamers, which is you put something in a device on the floor, and when it senses water, it screams at you, right? And I think you can buy them at Home Depot, and we're all familiar with those. They're not connected, and the only way they work is if you happen to be in earshot, right? And so what the new technology is, what our technology is about, is we have a cloud platform with a lot of intelligence and a lot of data tracking, and that communicates with the sensors that are typically put throughout a building. So, in the world of, and now in the world of COVID, it is even more important because we become sort of the eyes and ears in your building, right? As in these buildings that are idle and with little or no tenants and a skeleton crew, it becomes even more important now to have use technology, and not just water leaks, but in general, use technology to monitor your building remotely. And so we do it for water damage, and as many of your listeners might know, water damage is usually the number one or the number two property loss claim every year in buildings. And so It's a big issue. It's not only the most frequent loss, but it's also can be a very large loss if you take out a big piece of equipment like an elevator, for example.
What's really interesting about how stuck in cement the insurance industry is that on the property side, Laurie, the bulk of underwriting when it comes to insurance, property insurance specifically, is fire. Like
Yes.
Even today, most of the underwriters at firms the senior underwriters almost always have fire backgrounds, and when the new underwriters come in, that's what they get trained on, is fire. And it's ironic, right? Because you just said water is more frequent and can be severe. And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know this is on the residential side, I don't know if it's the same on the commercial side. Water is actually magnitudes more costly from a loss
Yes.
perspective than fire.
Yes, and you're right. I mean, it's usually what we say it's a fire and theft combined is still lower than water damage and losses, and that's at the insurance side, right? And so there's the side on the building owner, on the client side. Well, the building owner has a deductible, right? And so the deductible, could be, small, like $25,000 a building or something. It could be very large. In some cases, if you own a lot of property, you're going to have a high deductible, like $500,000 or $1 million. So that means that your risk is up to that amount of money for every leak, right? And so it doesn't take much calculation to realize that it really is important to have a water leak detection system. And until wireless, it was really, really difficult to do that because the technology was either the screamers, which they're great for your home, but they don't really work in a commercial property.
Mm-hmm.
And there is another technology, a long line a sensor, a cable, like made by Trace Tech and others. Those are powered, so they have to be plugged in. And that's great for for example, a data center where everything is plugged in and it doesn't matter. And it is used quite often in data centers. But if you don't want to bring power to, for example, your restroom area, or your mechanical, where you have your mechanical rooms and janitorial rooms where you might have leaks, areas like under the kitchen sink and such, wireless sensing just really gives you the flexibility to sense a leak anywhere in the building.
Yeah. What is your opinion, and do you use or install or operate around the water devices that can actually detect water flow, understand it, and when it recognizes that something might be off, shut down water completely to the structure to prevent water from leaking out? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nick. We get asked that quite a bit. For a single family home, it's a great way to find a leak, right? Because kind of there's a discrete number of water sources that you have in your home. And if somebody's taking a shower, or at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't expect any flow at all, right? And so for a small area like that, it makes a lot of sense. For a commercial building where you have water flowing all the time through all these different risers and domestic water and wastewater and all these different flows for the HVAC system, it's really, really difficult to
Mm-hmm.
use flow sensing. And when I talk about flow, there's two kinds of flow sensing. There's the kind that you kind of wrap around a pipe that's non-invasive. And then there's the kind that is installed, interrupts the pipe, so it's installed as a sort of a sub-meter,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I can talk about the differences there. But in general, detecting leaks, if your purpose is detecting leaks in a commercial building, it's very difficult to use flow metering technology alone, right? Because you're not going to, what you really want to do in a commercial building is you want to find a drip, 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 right? And, if you got an 1.5-inch pipe size, which is typical, you're not going to, it needs to be very, very super sensitive to be able to discern between, 10 gallons per minute and 10.05 gallons per minute,
Mm-hmm.
if you follow me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, but having said that, there is knowledge that you can gain with the combination of point sensing, which is what we do, and what we do now, and flow sensing, which we will add at the later on this year. So we recognize that it does add value, but it does not replace point sensing, because really what you're doing here is, if your goal is to protect the asset, so you're protecting the building, if that's your primary goal, then you're going to want to sense the water that's coming out of the pipe, not necessarily the water that's flowing through the pipe down the drain that might be wasted.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It does. It does a lot. How has the cost changed over time? So I think you said 20, 30 years ago, this, the screamers were around. How, the technology is now more sophisticated. Is it much more reasonable and more cost effective and economical for a commercial entity, or,
Yeah.
multifamily, multi-unit, complex, habitational complex, to install one of these than in years past?
Yes, and let me just say that the screamer technology, well, I don't even know if we can call that a technology, but the screamer solution was really never appropriate for a commercial building. I mean, maybe you would want to put that in your home, and hope that you're going to be there to hear it. But if you compare to the technology, the long line sensing technology that I mentioned, where you have to, you're plugging in the sensor to electric power, so much more we are so much more cost effective now. I mean, it's in the range of 3 to 5 times less expensive. And a lot of that has to do with the ability to just place a sensor anywhere. The sensors are battery operated, right? So they, literally, they cost maybe about $100, and you can put them anywhere. And the key for commercial property is maintaining good communication throughout the building. And that, I will say, is a bit of the tricky part, right? And that's where the expertise comes in. And then the second part of the expertise is when you take that data and when you get that signal from the sensor that there's an alarm, what you do with it, right? And so let me talk about the first part, right? It's really, really important, because of course these are wireless sensors, that they communicate well throughout a building. And as you know, a typical commercial building has a lot of concrete and steel and all sorts of building materials that would obstruct a wavelength that's trying to get through. And I promise I won't geek you out too much
No, that's
on this.
yes. No, you go. You use whatever level of engineering terms are going to adequately describe this.
Okay, thank you. I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley, so I'm surrounded by all these geeks, and I love it. So the issue in a commercial building that you generally don't have in a residence is that you have to go through thick walls and rebar and such. So one of the things that we learned, we understood from having been in this business for almost 15 years, is that Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is a specific frequency at 2.4 gigahertz, and that's what most of your devices use in your home. So, if you have a video camera, Ring or something outside your door or something, that's going to be a Wi-Fi device. And so, two things to note, and you guys and your listeners probably know this already. Wi-Fi doesn't have a great range distance between the device.
I think everybody knows that.
Yes. And it's just not acceptable in a commercial building, in part because of that. I mean, we need to go sort of a few hundred feet. And so we use the frequency as a sub-gigahertz frequency, so it's a much lower frequency. And all else being equal, lower frequency, longer distance sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, the other part about Wi-Fi, and you also may know, is that it's an always-on technology. So what that means practically is that the battery life is lower. So your video cameras, I have video cameras around my house. Well, I have to change those batteries or charge the batteries every like 4 months or something. And so that won't work in a commercial application.
I was having a humorous image of there's a commercial with a pro football player where he's responsible for taking care of the stadium, right? And
Yeah.
he's walking around because the smoke detector is chirping, and he can't figure out which smoke detector it is, and he keeps going to the wrong one, and it's always the one behind him. And that's the image I have as you're describing these with these batteries. Is the first thing that came to my mind. It's just like, oh boy, in a big warehouse or industrial
Yeah.
facility, it's like, am I going to have to be chasing chirps? So it does sound like the batteries do last longer. How much longer?
Yeah.
And how do you prevent that humorous or not so humorous?
Not so
I'm
humorous.
trying to where is this thing?
Yeah, yeah. And well, luckily we figured that out. And so we track, so number one, the batteries last somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 years, depending on how often they're sensing a leak, right? So typically what our customers do is when they start getting notices from us that that a sensor has a low battery, then they start putting that on a program maintenance list, right?
Mhm.
So it's controlled, and they're doing it as part of their building maintenance. So this is one of the parts about the platform. The platform, our Trident management platform, um, monitors every single piece of equipment we have in the building, right? So we not only monitor every endpoint, but we also monitor the hubs and the smart base station, and also, if you have valve controllers and valves that we've installed in your building, we monitor those too. So it's really because we consider this a critical system for the building, right? It's we are trying to stop all water damage, which is not only property loss and dollars and such, but it's also business interruption. It
Mhm.
could cause that dreaded 4-letter M word that we talk about, which is mold. And it's just a if anybody's had a water leak prior that's listening to this, I'm sure they will remember the pain involved in that, whether it was in their house or in their building.
Yeah, I remember having a podcast interview. Can't remember exactly who, but Canadian insurance professional, and the number one cause of loss in the Toronto area were water leaks and water damage in high
Yeah.
rises,
Yes.
because they occur in upper floors, and then it becomes, if they're, especially if there's nobody there, they become uncontrollable, potentially reaching down into the floors beneath that particular unit, and it could just be an absolute disaster having
Yes.
to gut multiple units on multiple floors because of a water leak. It's that insidious.
Yes. And we like to say, gravity is not your friend when it comes to water, right? And it will find its way down the building, and the taller the building, the more the damage. And so you're right, these taller buildings are very susceptible. So, and when I talk about commercial, I'm talking about sort of that broadly, Nick. So it's not just commercial office or medical office or pharmaceuticals or hospitality or university buildings or research facilities or hospitals. It's also multifamily. So the thing about multifamily that's unique is, number one, is it's somebody's house, right? And so you've got a lot of sort of personal, your personal items that may be irreplaceable and valuable to you. And then secondly, you're living on top or below somebody. So, one of the things that I always remind people of, because you'll talk to a resident of a high-rise building, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm protected because I bought this so and so water leak detection, some sensors, and I put them in my unit, right? And I said, well, that's good. So you've actually protected the people below you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you're going to get hit from your neighbor's 1 or 2 floor, maybe
Yep.
however many floors above you, right? So you really need to buy them the system. And so that's why it needs to be a full building system. And I also think it needs to report to the building maintenance people, not
Yeah.
just the owner.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I do have personal experience with exactly that, living in a multi-story building apartment in Boston. In the middle of winter, I couldn't get my shower to shut off. Like it
Mm,
just kept running. And I said, oh, I'll just get to it later. And to me, it didn't seem like that big a deal. I'll just run it in the shower,
yeah.
right? And you're right, water is so insidious that it found a crack somewhere and got to the floor beneath us. And I got, my door pounding on one morning because the guy beneath me was just like, "What the hell's going on? My paint is bubbling. I think there's a water leak." And yeah, water is insidious when it comes to that. It will find the lowest point.
Yeah, and it is, and in that case, so I mean, it's really almost remiss. We have a client who owns mostly commercial buildings, but they also own some multifamily. And basically, their head of engineering said, knowing that this kind of technology is available and not installing it in your building to protect your assets is almost unconscionable. I
Mhm.
mean, it really doesn't make sense. And, like I use the smoke detector for water analogy because if you think back, I don't know, 30 years or so, maybe not that long, smoke detectors were kind of a nice to have, right? And now, they're required. Now, a lot of that's code, but people understand the need for that. And so that's why, we're just trying to help inform the industry of, the insurance industry, as well as, their clients and our customers, that there is this solution.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to report. So one of the things that's happened in the last year or two, Nick, is the insurance industry, and I'm talking about the carriers now, the P&C carriers, are starting to take notice. And it is great. It wasn't lost on us in the beginning. So I've been at the detection group actually for 7 years when we bought another small company that was started by a guy who was in the restoration business. And I came on as CEO because of my experience in leak detection from prior
Hmm.
prior companies. And it wasn't lost on me right back then in 2013 that the insurance business is perhaps the largest financial beneficiary of this technology,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's not the customers that actually we have today, which are building owners and corporations. It's really the insurance carrier. And finally, that they've woken up, and we've gotten a lot of progress in the last year or two. I'd love to describe a little bit of that to you, if that's okay.
I would love that because that's where I wanted to head to and sort of finish off our conversation is the application of it. And I'd like to hear about how far you've taken it because I feel as though I've got my finger on the pulse of what has been sort of corralling this and preventing it from escaping and becoming more standardized in the market. But I'd like to at least hear from someone on the ground how far you've been able to take it, because I am like extremely concerned about the inability of the industry to take advantage of these technologies over and
Right.
over. And this is beyond just water detection, like just all the different types of technologies that exist. They just it's like the plague with them trying to avoid these technologies. So
Yeah.
I am really curious as to how far how far you've been able to take it, and how long you think the curve will be before this is potentially standard practice risk management for commercial entities, but also insurers kind of forcing it on their commercial insureds.
Yes, I mean, and that is the crux of the conversation, and it's all great, and it's what I can say is that it's starting, right? So, not both the real estate business and the insurance business. I mean, let's think if we could pick two other industries that are more conservative than those two. So that is the
True.
first issue,
Very true.
right? Everybody is very conservative and they're data driven and such, and so. Um, there was a lot of hesitation in the beginning, and one of the things, so I can tell you that one of the huge accomplishments here, on our side, is that last month we received approval from Factory Mutual, right? So FM approval, many of your listeners may know them, because FM Global is obviously one of the top commercial property insurers in the world, and they have a division that tests products against a standard. And that, you mentioned fire protection. That's where it all started back in the mid 1800s, right?
They are the gold standard for it. To me, I always I put them on that pedestal of the role model that I wish other insurers would sort of emulate in how they, they're basically a company of engineers. That's how they think
Exactly.
about that. In insurance, in property insurance, for instance, to me is sort of like applied engineering.
Right, exactly. Because the where the carriers really can assist their clients is in helping them reduce risk by improving their building systems. And so FM came to us last year. I mean, we've been talking with FM for many years, right? But they came to us last year and said, "Okay, we're ready," kind of thing, right? And so they wrote a standard, an FM standard on actually they edited a standard they already had, which was a standard for hydrocarbon leaks, and they added water to it, and so it became a liquid leak standard. And then they invited everybody to submit their technology, their solutions, and so we did. And it's a lot of work and a lot of testing. I mean, I don't have to tell this audience, FM is very rigorous in their testing for quality, for consistency, and for what that the system does what it says it's going to do in various situations and various temperature ranges and all sorts of things. And so our engineers work closely with their engineers, and we received the approval, and I'm really proud to say that we're the first and only wireless water leak detection solution that's FM approved.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. And I can't tell you how important this is to us, and we're just now learning about the impact. So now what we're doing, and this happened all in the last sort of 30 days, right? We are giving seminars and webinars to insurance loss control engineers around the country, just so that they can get up to speed on how the system works, et cetera. And then we're helping their answer questions about their clients' particular situations or particular buildings or portfolios or stuff. So it's starting, and I think this really could be transformational for the wireless, for us as the detection group, but also for wireless and IoT as a kind of a technology that's utilized and recognized by the insurance industry as one that can really help lower risk.
Yeah. So that's where I think the disconnect begins to unravel, because you got the ear of the loss control folks, but in reality, with this sort of technology where you're expecting losses to go down, so loss costs will trend down the more this technology becomes standardized in the industry. I'm disappointed with the lack of response from the insurers to provide instead of waiting for the actuarial data to kind of pinpoint that the loss experience has begun to improve. I have found there's been that disconnect of implementing these technologies, or being forward thinking in getting companies
Yes.
to implement this technology, knowing that the losses are going to go down. So they could realistically get in front of this, be proactive, push this with the necessary discount, and it would almost encourage the standardization, because now these commercial entities will know this pays for itself. Over
Yes.
time, we will get the necessary premium credits. And I don't know how much, what the economics are on your end, but it sounds to me like it's something that a risk manager at a commercial entity can, on the back of an envelope, can do a return on investment and say, if we spend this money on this investment for this risk reduction, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, that investment will have paid for itself in reduction in insurance premium. And that right there is that's the chasm that I think the
Yes.
insurers have not been willing to cross over. They're sort of saying, yeah, go ahead, make that investment. Go ahead, drive down your
Yes.
loss costs, but you're not
Yeah.
getting any discount until we actually see it.
See the data. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we can help with that. So what we say, Nick, in terms of a ROI is literally, the systems are cost effective enough that you basically have to avoid one leak and the system pays for itself. I mean, so let me give you an example. So we just installed a system in a building in San Francisco. It's a 38-story office tower, 3 weeks ago or something, maybe 4 weeks now. And the building engineer called our guy like last week, and he said, "Oh my God, you saved my, you know what?" He goes, "We had a toilet overflow on the 17th floor in the men's restroom on Friday afternoon, evening, right?" And he said, I got the call, and he said, "Oh, and by the way, there's no floor drain in that restroom." And I got the call, and I went up there, and he said it was flowing. He said, "Let me tell you, that would have nobody would have caught it, and it would have gone down to the lobby by the time anyone came and noticed it." So, you can't, calculate how much you want that cost would have been, but it's probably 10 times
Yeah.
what the cost of the system is. So it really is a driven thing. The other cost thing I will say is that, we have two, we have many big customers, but two in particular that are that we have spoken with and engaged with their insurance companies. I mean, and they're big enough that they have, I guess, a consortia of insurance companies. But we learned that and they've been using our technology for 7, 8, 9 years, and so they're very familiar with it. And they're actually just in the process of upgrading to our new system. So we had a former system, and now this Trident system is the new one. And they have loss ratios in the single digits. So I really, so I actually had to ask somebody, because, I'm more from the tech world. I didn't really understand what that meant. And so
It's good.
I said,
It's good.
and I said, well, exactly, is that good? and they said yes. And I said, well, what I've heard is that, a good loss, a typical loss ratio might be in the 50 to 60%,
Exactly.
not
Exactly.
right.
Yep.
So, I mean, if I don't know what other proof that you need. Now, granted, these customers, I'm sure, are doing other things, other proactive things besides just leak detection. So I won't take all the credit for that, but it's got to be a big portion of it. And so, it's this kind of information, and they know, it's just, we have to get off the duff. And the other thing I will say, what you said earlier, Nick, about, the insurance companies have to reduce the premium or whatever. I think it could the discount, if you will, could come from many places, right? So I know when you reduce your premium, that means your top line goes down, and nobody really wants to do that, right? So without lots of data, but maybe you could take some money from marketing or from some other place and provide and pay for part of the system or all the system for your customer, whatever, so that it's not, there's different pots of money, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I do agree with you completely that the carriers need to pony up again, because they're the major beneficiary of this technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be a business unless you had a sales and marketing department. So, I know your sales team is probably skilled at, answering objections and kind of talking through that. It's, as an insurance professional, there's still something that irks me about it, because water leak claims is outside of what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is more on the natural catastrophe side of stuff. And I've seen firsthand, having conversations with folks about future catastrophes. And, a lot of property owners, their eyes glaze over. It's like, you want me to make what sort of investment for some future thing that may or may not happen?
Yeah.
It's a tough sell. And if it becomes a lot easier if, you have, the carrot, which is the insurance program.
Yeah.
They all have that. That is, to me, that's the lubricant that can potentially, that benefits everybody in the transaction, including the insurer themselves. And as we discussed at the beginning, their inability to gravitate towards the technology, super frustrating. Now that the technology is here, their inability to sort of blend it into their business model and kind of force the issue with it. It's a head scratcher to me, that it hasn't happened faster, because it benefits it. Laurie, I always when I think of like a sales transaction, everyone sort of goes for win-win, which is, of course, you want
Right.
to do that. I always think there's a third win. There's society wins. You drive down loss costs. If you implement this sort of technology across the board, it becomes standard, similar to how smoke detectors and fire alarm detection systems have become standard. It drives down loss costs. That frees up capital over the long period for companies and individuals to then go do other things. And it's, to me, that technology like yours adds to the wealth of society. It becomes a win-win-win. And in this particular case, I just feel like it's my industry that's slowing down the adoption of it. And I find it super ironic.
Yeah, that is kind of an interesting way to look at it, Nick. Yes, and I think, where we are today as a company, we've installed our system in more than well over 400 buildings around the U.S. Right now, we're focused in the U.S., although we're getting some interest from the rest of North America. And these are, I'm really, really super proud of our customer base. It's some of the largest either property managers or property owners or corporations in the world, really. And so for example, one of our flagship buildings is Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. We were designed in to the tower, and we've caught, in fact, the first leak we caught in the tower was while it was still under construction, right? It was a sink area, a pantry area that, the contractor didn't do such a great job of it. And, our system was because it's modular, it was kind of being installed as the floors were getting complete. And so the alarm, the sensor kept going off, and the guy, the building engineer called my guy and said, your system doesn't work. It keeps alarming and there's no water here, right? So our guy went in to the building and he went on his hands and knees, and there was actually carpet underneath the sink. And he said, come here. He said, this carpet is sopping wet, right? So what happened was the water was flowing from the sink sort of behind the wall, because there was a gap. And behind the wall, down the wall, on the inside, coming back into the floor of the sink area and causing the sensor to alarm. So we saved somebody's butt, if I might say so, right?
You go ahead. Yes.
And it's like those kinds of things that there's a ton of stories. Nick, just to give you an idea, in the last 3.5 years, we've sensed over 11,000 leaks. So just, do the math. If you've got an average commercial leak is somewhere around $80,000 or $90,000, I don't even want to do the math. It's a big number.
It is.
And how do we get hopefully the insurance, I think I'm very hopeful that with the FM approval and with that sort of stamp of certification that this system, it's not a pilot anymore. This system works, and it works for these kinds of customers. And that is what I'm hoping that, FM and others, we are talking with other carriers, not just FM, but they kind of led the charge on this. And the other carriers are saying, wow, you got this approval. We need to, hurry up and get a program together to deploy this. So I'm hopeful that it will move faster now.
Great idea, a great concept. Seems like a great product. And honestly, the more you talk, the more excited I get, because this is the type of win-win-win our industry can hang our hat on. We don't necessarily have the best stereotype, and it's products like yours that can change that, where we become mission critical to adding to the wealth of society, by reducing risk. We have the capabilities, we can do it. And so thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday afternoon to discuss this. I just think it's so critically important.
Well, Nick, again, thank you for having me. And I've really enjoyed this conversation and having all the discussion about the insurance industry and how we can work together. And, what I just would say is if anyone wants to learn more about our company, just go to www.thedetectiongroup.com. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, I will have all of your connections, homepage, everything. This transcription will be in the show notes. So anyone that wants to reach out to Laurie, learn more about the detection group, just go over to the show notes. Everything will be there. Again, Laurie, thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Stay inside.
Thanks. You too.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.